As thinkers, mankind have ever divided into two sects, materialists and idealists. The first class founding on experience, the second on consciousness. The first class beginning to think from the data of the senses, the second class perceive that the senses are not final, and say, the senses give us representations of things, but what are the things themselves? They cannot tell. The materialist insists on facts, on history, on the force of circumstances, and the animal wants of man. The idealist on the power of thought and of will, on inspiration, on miracle, on individual culture. These two modes of thinking are both natural, but the idealist contends that his way of thinking is in higher nature. He concedes all that the other affirms, admits the impressions of sense, admits their coherency, their use and beauty, and then asks the materialist for his grounds of assurance that things are as his senses represent them.
Transcendentalists moved in two directions. One in their influence outward, the other inward. The outward movement of transcendentalism was in the direction of reforming society, helping people to live together better and more productively and more meaningfully. They formed societies of their own, one notably at Brook Farm, West Roxbury, Massachusetts, founded in 1841 by a transcendentalist, George Ripley. Days were constructed in a way that allowed for physical labor out in the fields and allowed for intellectual and moral stimulation as well. The other direction in which transcendentalism moved was inward. By trusting yourself, by listening to your own conscience, by listening to your own heart, and not being burdened down, encumbered by antique texts and tradition's dead hand and the staleness of conventional attitudes. Trust thyself, they said again and again. The leading exemplars of that inward-looking, equally optimistic as the outward-looking, equally anti-materialistic were Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, and Margaret Fuller.
Each and all. Little thinks in the field yon red-cloaked clown of thee from the hilltop looking down. The heifer that lows in the upland farm, far heard, lows not thine ear to charm. The sexton, tolling his bell at noon, deems not that great Napoleon stops his horse and lists with delight, whilst his files sweep round yon alpine height. Nor knowest thou what argument thy life to thy neighbour's creed has lent. All are needed by each one, nothing is fair or good alone. I thought the sparrow's note from heaven singing at dawn on the alder bough. I brought him home in his nest at even. He sings the song, but it cheers not now. For I did not bring home the river and sky. He sang to my ear, they sang to my eye. The delicate shells lay on the shore, the bubbles of the latest wave. Fresh pearls to their enamel gave, and the bellowing of the savage sea greeted their safe escape to me. I wiped away the weeds and foam, I fetched my sea-born treasures home. But the poor, unsightly, noisome things had left their beauty on the shore, with the sun and the sand and the wild uproar. The lover watched his graceful maid, as mid the virgin train she strayed, nor knew her beauty's best attire was woven still by the snow-white choir. At last she came to his hermitage, like the bird from the woodlands to the cage. The gay enchantment was undone, a gentle wife, but fairy none. Then I said, I covet truth, beauty is unripe childhood's cheat. I leave it behind with the games of youth. As I spoke, beneath my feet the ground pine curled its pretty wreath, running over the club moss burrs. I inhaled the violet's breath. Around me stood the oaks and firs, pine cones and acorns lay on the ground. Over me soared the eternal sky, full of light and of deity. Again I saw, again I heard the rolling river, the morning bird. Beauty through my senses stole. I yielded myself to the perfect whole.
There is a power for good in the universe, and you can use it.
Welcome to the Science of Spiritual Reality with me, Mitchell K. Jones.
This week's scripture is Romans 12:4-5. For as in one body we have many members, and not all the members have the same function, so we, who are many, are one body in Christ, and individually we are members one of another.
Ralph Waldo Emerson's 1841 essay, Self-Reliance, which became one of the most influential and provocative texts in American intellectual history. Self-reliance is often misread as an advocacy of rugged individualism and sort of a lack of duty to others and to community. But really, it's about spiritual independence. It's about self-reliance spiritually and not needing a church or any external validation to understand the indwelling spirit. Emerson opens with the radical claim that society everywhere is in conspiracy against the manhood of every one of its members. He says society pressures individuals to conform, to suppress their originality, and to trade authenticity for approval, comparing society to a joint stock company where members surrender liberty in exchange for comfort and stability. And he positions his philosophy, self-reliance, against this idea. Self-reliance includes the core tenets of first, trusting your inner voice. Emerson insists that truth does not come from tradition or institutions or even scripture, but in fact comes from within. He says to believe your own thought, to believe that what is true for you in your private heart is true for all men. That is genius. So this is a radical democratization of spiritual authority. Everyone has access to truth if they're willing to listen to their inward voice. Emerson argues that the tragedy is often that we dismiss our insights just because they are our own. So this reflects the broader belief in the Transcendentalist movement, which again was a movement of writers and intellectuals and artists in the mid-19th century that believed that the divine was immanent, that God or moral law speaks directly to us through intuition, and that spirit then is indwelling. The second tenet of self-reliance is nonconformity as a moral duty. Emerson says, whoso would be a man must be a nonconformist. So nonconformity is fidelity, belief in the inner moral law. Emerson says, no law can be sacred to me but that of my nature. And so he elevates individual conscience above social custom, political law, and traditional religion, which is a view that empowers reformers, but also makes social order potentially unstable. A third idea is the problem of consistency. Emerson mocks what he calls the foolish consistency that traps people into defending old beliefs just because they once held them. He insists that growth requires contradiction. To be great is to be misunderstood, he said, and reminds readers that people like Socrates, Jesus, and Galileo were condemned because they refused to conform to prevailing norms. And fourth is the loss of the authentic self. One of Emerson's most evocative images contrasts a child with an adult. The child speaks honestly, judges freely, and expresses delight or disdain without calculation. The adult, by contrast, becomes haunted by reputation, respectability, and fear. So for Emerson, the tragedy of modern life is that we're socialized out of our own genius. So what kind of society follows from this philosophy? Emerson is deeply suspicious of organized reform, institutions, and even charity. He believes that true social change cannot be engineered and must emerge organically from transformed individuals. An institution is the lengthened shadow of one man, he says. So, for Emerson, the path to utopia runs inward first. Reform of the self is paramount, and society will follow. But not all the transcendentalists believe this, and those that lived and worked at Brook Farm, a transcendentalist community in Massachusetts, actually believed in communal living, and they adopted the beliefs of Charles Fourier, who we will talk about a little bit more in the future. And I think we'll probably talk about Brook Farm a bit more in the future. But that was another alternative kind of transcendentalism that was more communal than Emerson's more individual.
I first fell in love with Ralph Waldo Emerson at a crisis point in my own life. I was a heartsick 22-year-old graduate student, floundering in academia, panicky about my future, overwhelmed by self-doubt, and terrified I would never discover who I was really or why I'd been put on this baffling planet. I'd struggled with confusion since childhood. Everywhere I turned, duplicity and hypocrisy were obvious to me as a boy. Nothing and no one were quite what they appeared to be. The grown-ups juggled alternating masks in different surroundings, and I was a two-faced deceiver myself, concealing who I really was, an angry, fatherless, damaged boy, under a shield of Teflon bravado. I acted the part of an all-American overachiever with a promising future ahead of him, while inwardly I was a miserable train wreck, cynical, paranoid, lonely, and lost. I told myself that an advanced degree would help to boost my drooping self-esteem, but that was a fantasy. When that fall semester started, I was as frustrated, angry, and self-punishing as I had ever been in my life, suffocating in academia, bereft of inspiration, holding my breath, hoping for something important to happen, to make things matter, to give me a purpose. Yet what that elusive thing was exactly, I could not say. I was also chronically out of cash, which is what led me to apply for a research assistant's job working for a visiting professor from Yale named Barbara Packer. Professor Packer needed a flunky to do the grunt work on a manuscript she was late in delivering, a study of Ralph Waldo Emerson's major essays. My job was to hunt down out-of-print reference books, excavate ancient newspaper clips, and transcribe notes from blurry microfiche onto multicolored 3x5 index cards. I knew very little about Emerson at the time. I'd read snippets of his extravagant prose in high school, but mostly remembered him as the avuncular mentor to the younger, hipper, more tragic Henry David Thoreau, whose Walden had wowed many of us in senior English. Professor Packer kept me on my toes that year, pouring through the library stacks, lugging books home to comparative textual references. By the time that spring semester rolled around, I'd managed to receive, with no forethought on my part, a fairly good introduction to the life and works of this extraordinary man. Meeting Emerson changed my life. His big ideas challenged my puny worldview and exposed me to a vision of human potential I had never known existed. His insights were radical and paradigm-shifting. Human life has a spiritual purpose, to recognize our true nature, evolve from ignorance to self-knowledge. We are each endowed with unique purpose and genius, and our mandate is to unfold our character as passionately, originally, and bravely as possible. Emerson taught that pain, loss, suffering, and conflict are teachers and guides in disguise, crucial for our awakening, and that nonconformity, inconsistency, introversion, stubbornness, quirkiness, and a little wickedness are beneficial virtues for self-realization. Following the crowd is a mistake, and changing your mind is a very good thing. These were eye-opening insights for me, opposed to everything I had been taught. The idea that we are spiritual beings first, personalities second, that no real separation exists between human life and God, cast a sacred light on existence that I had never known before. In the secular America where I'd grown up, God was off limits as a serious topic. I had no faith in a divine creator, was opposed to most organized religions, and considered myself a firm agnostic. Yet, when Emerson counseled, "You look within not to find yourself, but to find God," I had a sense of what he meant, though the terminology was arcane and loaded. When he described the one mind, the divine intelligence running like an electric cord through creation, he spoke deeply to my unarticulated experience. He taught that nature is God made visible in the world, that we see God through the mirror of nature, in other words, and that we are reflected in the creation. He explained that genius is the light of divine intelligence within us, and that we're inseparable from this power source, that happiness results from obeying its guidance, trusting our own choices, resisting the urge to imitate, knowing ourselves as outcroppings of the natural world, and therefore of God, joined in a kind of cosmic fandango with all of existence. The more Emerson I read, the more alive I felt. I began to make overdue decisions. I left graduate school, made amends with my family, broke off a bad relationship, moved to New York City, started finding work as a freelance journalist, and stopped blaming the world for my problems. My addiction to taking offense over tiny social transgressions finally lost its allure. Emerson said, "Never fall into the vulgar mistake of dreaming that you are persecuted when you are contradicted." I could hear him speaking to me. I focused on looking inside for the source of my troubles, examining my angle of vision, the stories I told myself about myself and the world, who I took myself to be, what things signified, the details that mattered, and those that did not. Emerson emphasized that your angle of vision creates your world, an insight he shared with the ancient Stoics, and that genuine freedom rests in the power to choose how we wish to respond to life's conditions. Knowing that perspective shapes reality, we're better able to interrupt our knee-jerk reactions and respond to challenges more skillfully, constructively, mindfully. Except in cases of rare affliction under physical torture or sickness, for example, a person always has the power to choose her responses and to decide when, how, and by whom she allows herself to be hurt. It was glaringly obvious that the majority of my problems were self-created and arose from how I was choosing to look at situations, not from the circumstances themselves. I learned from Emerson that it is the tendency to cling to false beliefs and confuse our narratives for reality that gives rise to most of our suffering. Self-hating, dishonest, twisted stories diminish our lives and prevent us from knowing who we are. Robbed of self-knowledge, we lose our direction. Quote, "If one does not know to which port one is sailing, no wind is favorable," Seneca reminds us. A firm grasp on your compass is necessary to reach the desired shore. My own lifeboat capsized again 2 years after I arrived in New York. I received a fatal diagnosis that promised me no more than 5 years to live. With mortality in my face, all bets were off. I quit my vapid magazine job, sold my belongings, gave up the lease on my apartment, said goodbye to my friends, and traveled with a friend to India in hopes of finding a spiritual path that would help me survive my mortal terror. I hopped around from monasteries to ashrams to healing workshops, overwhelmed with questions, seeking spiritual strength, clawing my way through an encroaching darkness. My shredded copy of the portable Emerson was always with me. If I was having a particularly gruesome day, a well-spent hour with Emerson could pull me off the ledge, remind me of possibility, settle my nerves, shift my perspective, and loosen the noose of self-pity that I was struggling to keep from around my neck. By the mid-1990s, strangely enough, I was still around and reasonably healthy. And when treatments for my condition finally appeared, I was given a second lease on life, surreal and surprising in the extreme. Aristotle compared good luck to the moment on the battlefield when the arrow hits the guy next to you. It's an abstract, outer space, torn in half emotion, partly shattering, partly sublime. Awe is the only word that fits. This torn-in-half feeling of tenuous survival is akin to how many are feeling today. As the world has become more unhinged, a collective sense of outrage and disbelief has settled over citizens in countries around the world, a kind of pre-traumatic shock, paranoia, exhaustion, mistrust, and dread of the next heart-stopping news. There's a dire need for spiritual direction, justice-seeking, restitution, truth-telling, and repairing of the social fabric. Fortunately, alongside this collective trauma is a growing interest in our own potential, an urgent pull toward awakening, a fierce determination to learn from calamity, question our values, reshape our choices, optimize our potential, and cherish our lives, knowing how quickly they can be threatened or taken from us completely. The pandemic has bequeathed us, along with some terrible things, a sudden planetary awareness of our shared impermanence and fragility. This global collision with mortality has given rise to a proportionate upsurge of public interest in self-examination, authenticity, identity, purpose, and what it means to be a fully human being. Not since the consciousness revolution of the 1960s have we witnessed such a nations-wide display of soul-searching and spiritual hunger as we see now. That's my purpose for writing this book. Emerson's transformational wisdom is exactly the medicine we need today. His teaching shows us that there is a way through, even when all can seem lost, a humanistic path to self-knowledge that combines the pragmatic, unsentimental strength of the Stoics with the majesty, beauty, and freedom of transcendental philosophy. Having used these lessons for 40 years, I can attest to their power and usefulness and their profound relevance to the problems that we face as contemporary people. Emerson will teach you, if you let him, to break down the walls of perceived limitations, move beyond the confines of self-absorbed ego, and attain a vision of your life that is infinitely larger, deeper, and richer than anything you believed possible. As he said, the health of the eye demands a horizon. We are never tired so long as we can see far enough. May this book be a helpmeet in seeing farther, standing taller, listening more closely, loving more deeply, and savoring without apology or reservation the preciousness of your life. Emerson is the teacher we need today. It is high time we reclaimed our national treasure.
Transcendentalism is still with us in many ways. Every time you look at one of the national parks or think about the possibility of saving some open land or green space, that is the Transcendentalist legacy.
As Henry Thoreau writes in Walden, the Walden waters mingle with those of the pure Ganges. He is not writing about a pond in eastern Massachusetts. He is writing about the natural world. This attempt to achieve universalism is what, to me, Transcendentalism is all about.
I'm at the lovely home of Ralph Waldo Emerson here in Concord, Massachusetts. Ralph Waldo Emerson lived in this house for the majority of his adult life.
Here is where he greeted European and American writers and poets, anyone who wished to be empowered by his personal presence and thoughtful encouragement.
Concord, Massachusetts is probably the most famous village in America. In the 1830s and 40s, Concord was where some of the most famous writers and intellects of America gathered. And the question comes up, why did so many of them settle in this little village? Because of one man, Ralph Waldo Emerson, probably the most influential thinker of the 1830s and 40s, having written a small 90-page book called Nature, and given a couple of historic revolutionary addresses at Harvard. And people came to Concord because Emerson encouraged them if they were the people he wanted to have as neighbors, and because they admired Emerson very much.
So in this context, the utopian communities were, in Alice Feld Tyler's argument, logical expressions of freedom's ferment. These were attempts to carry the era's reform impulses to their most radical conclusion. So some of these early examples include the Rappites and the Owenites, The Rappites were a German pietist sect led by preacher George Rapp. They're also called Harmonists. And they formed celibate communal societies such as Harmony, Pennsylvania, and then Harmony, Indiana, which Owen later took over, formed New Harmony. But they believed they were preparing for Christ's imminent return, pre-millennium. The Owenites were a group that followed Robert Owen, and they expressed the same kind of ferment, but more secularly. The Owenites rejected theological explanations for social suffering, instead arguing that human character was shaped by environment. So if society were reorganized, human behavior would be transformed. And Owen started the experiment at New Harmony, Indiana, bought the community from the Rappites. And so this really symbolizes a shift from religious communism to secular, rationalistic social planning. Similar to the shift from, the ghost belief amongst Puritans to Franklin's critique of mesmerism that we talked about last week. So we're going to move beyond the theory, though, and talk about communities that actually push these experiments further by reorganizing intimate aspects of the human experience, such as labor, family, sexuality, and moral discipline. So our two texts today will be Bible Communism from the Oneida community, led by Noyes, who we talked about last time, which emerged directly from evangelical perfectionism of the burnt-over districts of the Second Great Awakening. And then we'll read Social Destiny of Man by Albert Brisbane, who is a leading American popularizer of French socialist Charles Fourier's social theory. As we go through this, keep in mind what you examined last class with the Shaker and Oneida meals. And keep in mind that these meals were about discipline, equality, gender roles, and moral formation, not just about sustenance or taste. And we'll expand this lens outward to see how these entire social systems were conducted around these principles.
Today, Owen did not see around him a superfluity of real wealth, which he deemed necessary for the happiness of mankind. He contended that private ownership of property led to an unequal distribution of wealth, especially when mechanical technology was applied to the factory system. His proposed solution to the problem was the establishment of villages of unity and mutual cooperation, where 500 to 1,500 people would, through common labor and programs of character building, remold their lives and prosper. He hoped by the successful example of such communities to extend his ideas to society at large. Although Owen at first gained respect and support in high places, he soon became unpopular when he denounced the institutions of the family and the churches as they were then organized. Consequently, he turned to what he considered a freer environment in America. The opportunity to buy Harmony, Indiana, came at an appropriate moment. Leaving the mills to the management of his 23-year-old son, Robert Dale, and taking William, his second son, with him, Robert Owen left for America in the fall of 1824. The Owens visited George Rapp at Economy, Pennsylvania. Then at Harmony, Indiana, Frederick Rapp assisted in completing the sale on January 2nd, 1825. Owen considered this initial investment of about $150,000 a bargain. Owen returned east, where he addressed 2 joint sessions of Congress. In Washington, he also showed a model of the buildings he proposed to erect later at New Harmony. He encouraged persons from Washington and elsewhere who were in sympathy with his ideas to join the new community. Taking care of the numbers who responded immediately was son William's burdensome responsibility. Robert Owen returned to New Harmony in April 1825. In the hall, the former church, he told the new inhabitants of his plans for them. a preliminary society was established with...
It may be difficult for post-Cold War listeners to believe, but in the 1800s, many people throughout the country, especially Northern Yankees, believed the communitarian spirit was elemental to the American creed. The system of association, as described by French philosopher Charles Fourier, was to 1840s America what liberal republicanism was to 1760s America. It was the fad ideology of the time, and it shaped Americans' responses to the changing political economy. Over 1,000 followers built more than 80 communes, claiming to be the true embodiment of Fourier's phalanstry system throughout the United States in the 1840s. I'm Mitchell K. Jones.
But now let's talk about how these two models diverge. So while they share goals, including the establishment of harmony, material abundance, and emotional happiness for all, they pursue them through different means. So we'll be looking first at Albert Brisbane's translation of Charles Fourier. So Albert Brisbane was the son of a Holland land company scion, and his parents sent him to France for an education. And while he was there, he discovered Charles Fourier, actually paid him to get lessons in his theory, and then ended up translating Fourier's works into English. And it was Brisbane's translations that caused the sensation of Fourierism in America. But Fourierism presented itself as a social science. So rather than revelation that like a religion might rely on, Fourierism was rooted in natural law. The unit of Fourierism is the phalanx. A phalanx is a word for a Greek military formation where everybody moves in unison, moves in the same direction. But a phalanx or phalanstry, which is like a French hotel, would be a self-sufficient community of roughly 1,600 people living in a single complex in the phalanstry, with shared kitchens, workshops, and social spaces. The social engine of the phalanstry is the passions. Charles Fourier mapped 12 to 13 fundamental passions. The task of society then was not to repress these passions, but to harmonize them through intelligent design of society. The labor model here is what Fourier calls attractive industry. Work must be pleasurable, and some steps can be made to do this. First, short rotating tasks are needed because variety is the spice of life. Voluntary groups would be organized into friendly competing series. And these groups and series would be organized based on the passions. And then labor would be play, could be like a game, could be like a rivalry, friendly rivalry, and social and creative expression. Even unpleasant work, Fourier argued, could be transformed. Children, which he called the famous little hordes, would compete joyfully for dirty tasks because children like dirt, he said. In social relations, Fourier pointed to bankruptcy and cuckoldry as twin evils of society. Marriage was seen as restrictive, and Fourier envisioned expanded sexual and emotional freedom, though Brisbane did often mute these ideas for his American readers. Distribution would be a system of rewards based on labor, capital, and talent. A hybrid system of private ownership as well as communal economic arrangements. Cooperation blended with market incentives. All right, and without further ado, let's get into Brook Farm. But just for a little side note, what you're seeing behind me is the film Phalansterol, a Romanian film from 1978, based on the Scieni phalanstery, which was before the revolutions of 1848. A Fourierist in Romania, Teodor Diamat, member of nobility, learned about the ideas of Charles Fourier and tried to build a phalanstery there. Some of the earliest members of the phalanstery were Roma people who had been liberated from slavery, but ultimately the community came to an end. The authorities crushed it in August 1836. So it was sort of a prelude in a way to the revolutions of 1848. Which, by the way, Karl Marx and Frederick Engels were involved in. They ended up fleeing to London, England, instead of America, although they thought about going to America for a time. All right, so we have a little bit of a Romanian reimagination of a phalanstery in the background, but we're talking about Brook Farm in Massachusetts, near Boston. It's actually on the outskirts of Boston, the historic site today. Also known as the Brook Farm Institute of Agriculture and Education, Brook Farm Association for Industry and Education, and also the Brook Farm Phalanx. And what was an experimental community at the Ellis Farm in West Roxbury, Massachusetts. It was founded in 1841 by a Unitarian minister, George Ripley, and his wife, Sophia. And they drew inspiration from transcendentalist principles, which is the same philosophy that we talked about when we read Emerson's Self-Reliance. Like Emerson, the Brook Farmers believed in the cultivation of individual intellect and spirit, but they also sought to realize those ideas in a structured collective setting, believing that combining their efforts, would produce better results. They were organized as a joint stock company, which again was the Fourierist model of people could invest in the company, but also resident members were to receive the benefits. The community promised members a share of the farm's profits in exchange for an equal contribution of labor. So they wanted to remediate the imbalance of compensated labor, wage labor they saw as sinful. So they believed that by distributing work equitably, they could enjoy both material sustenance and the leisure necessary for intellectual and spiritual pursuits, that by combining their efforts, it would free them up to sort of do these deeper intellectual and spiritual things. All in all, it was a practical attempt to live out the principled life that Emerson talked about. But Emerson questioned the project. And here's a quote from Emerson. He says, "Many of these persons who had compared their notes around the libraries of each other upon speculative matters became impatient of speculation and wished to put it into practice, Fourierism. Mr. George Ripley, some of his associates, established a society of which the principle was that the members should be stockholders, and that while some deposited money, others should be allowed to give their labor in different kinds of an equivalent money." But he sort of saw them as, a bunch of intellectuals that were playing at farming. He says, every one of them was a revolutionary in their own mind, but they didn't really want to do any dirty work. So, but last class we talked about, sort of the philosophical and intellectual drives and spiritual drives behind abolitionism and utopianism, and the desire to create a more perfect union, to really live up to those ideals that Jefferson and others penned in the founding documents. But today we're going to shift to sort of the fallout after some of these projects collapsed. And again, on the primary text is Nathaniel Hawthorne's Blithedale Romance, published in 1852, which was, a few years after the explosion of Fourierism. Hawthorne was a founding member of Brook Farm. He invested money in the project and did manual labor. He was there from April till November of 1841 and then left. And over a decade later, he wrote Blithedale Romance. So our guiding question today is going to be, what does satire, and specifically a fictionalized, darkly romantic account, reveal about the limits of utopian reform that more straightforward historical documents might miss? Again, you think about sort of these cultural products as a text to read against the grain. What are they really telling us about what's going on historically? So Nathaniel Hawthorne was born in 1804 in Salem, Massachusetts, a town that we talked about, haunted by Puritan history and the fact that one of his ancestors, in fact, Judge John Hawthorne, had been involved in the Salem witch trials. And Hawthorne grew up surrounded by stories of sin, guilt, and moral scrutiny. By the 1850s, he became a major literary figure. The Scarlet Letter, which sort of drew on those Puritan roots, published in 1850, became a massive success. But when he looks back at his Brook Farm days, he doesn't write a memoir. He writes what he calls a romance. And we talked a little bit about the idea of romanticism and the sentimental concept in Victorian Romanticism. But he insists in the preface that the characters are entirely fictitious, but he also says that his memoirs of Brook Farm are essentially a daydream and yet affect a foothold between fiction and reality. But why does he use fiction? Why does he use satire? For Hawthorne, fiction allows him to explore the internal psychological conflicts that doomed the experiment. These conflicts, the historical record and things like that, they can't really capture the emotion and the affect of these things. So let's get into the themes of the reading that I asked you to read, the first 5 chapters of Blithedale Romance. One of the first themes is the idea of lofty utopian ideals versus human nature. He kind of starts to take a pessimistic view of human nature. Blithedale obviously mirrors Brook Farm in that it preaches brotherhood, equality, and rejection of competition. But Coverdale's heroic trek through a snowstorm is sort of self-mocking, intellectual play, is self-mocking, and he calls the Brook Farmers intellectuals play acting and farming. Even camaraderie is performative. Zenobia, who is based on Margaret Fuller, feminist transcendentalist writer, she jokes, "As for the garb of Eden, I shall not assume it until after midday." So idealism collides with the whole cold, hard work and discomforts of reality and farm life. The other idea is the persistence of the self, that these collective utopias can't erase personal histories and desires. Coverdale observes with his own idiosyncratic point of view. Hollingsworth's zeal becomes authoritarian. Zenobia becomes trapped in her past and in Priscilla's story. So the commune stages old dramas rather than transforming the members and the idea of society itself. Another concept is reform as a spectacle. Coverdale acts as a detached observer, a voyeuristic narrator, not as a participant, watching rather than acting. Hawthorne satirizes reformers who love ideas more than messy reality. And ultimately, jealousy, rivalry, ambition, human passions expose this gap between ideals and lived experience. Emerson would call this the danger of speculation detached from practice. There are some symbols he points out. So the veil, Priscilla, Hollingsworth, and Westervelt's all wear a veil that identifies secrecy, concealment, and hidden sin. Zenobia wears an exotic flower, which she wears a different flower every day, which represents beauty and pride and vitality that can't survive in Blithedale's reality. The flower dies, and she has to get a new one. And also the masquerade. There are masquerade balls, where they wear masks and things. These rustic festivals that turn chaotic. So utopia becomes a temporary, unsustainable performance. And finally, this idea of, which, is sort of one of our themes for today, the afterlife of reform. In the end, the Blithedale communards have tragic endings. Zenobia commits suicide. Hollingsworth is financially ruined and embarrassed. And Coverdale is also ultimately alone. So the true story is then failed human connection, rather than, the idea of connection in theory. Coverdale admits that he loved Priscilla all along, but his personal, his personal passions trump these utopian ideas. So ultimately, it's a lesson about history versus romance. The historical record are facts, and Hawthorne explains why utopias fail. Pride, jealousy, and selfishness undermine their dream.
Emerson and Alcott. The way to compare men is to compare their respective ideals. The actual man is too complex to deal with. Emerson is a critic, poet, philosopher with talent not so conspicuous, not so adequate to his task, but his field is still higher, his task more arduous. Lives a far more intense life, seeks to realize a divine life, his affections and intellect equally developed. Has advanced farther, and a new heaven opens to him. Love and friendship, religion, poetry, the holy are familiar to him. The life of an artist, more variegated, more observing, fine perception, not so robust, elastic, practical enough in his own field, faithful, a judge of men. There is no such general critic of men and things, no such trustworthy and faithful man, more of the divine realized in him than in any, a poetic critic, reserving the unqualified nouns for the gods.
One of the points that's absolutely essential to understand Margaret Fuller as well as the other transcendentalists is the concept of the newness, which was a phrase they used all the time. They believed that they were participating in a kind of mental state, an ambition, a feeling that they called the newness. They were all second-generation Americans, all born somewhere time early in the 19th century. And they felt that it was their job, because they had been brought up as responsible sort of people of Puritan stock, it was their job to create this new nation and this new continent. They were filled with a sense of hope and a sense of mission.
Good news!
And cats, they're not usually known for their love of swimming, but one feline in Northern Virginia is hitting the water instead of the gym in an effort to lose weight. Holly is a 13-year-old cat who dislikes the outdoors and other physical activities, but with encouragement from her owner and weekly visits to the Old Town Pet Resort. Holly has managed to lose 1 pound in 6 weeks. Stay with us, everybody. We've got a lot more to go.
Good news!
This is a Grandpa Uncle Ernie happiness ad. Now, it isn't all happiness, because one of my nephews, Sammy Squirrel, got run over out in the road. He wasn't careful. He wasn't careful, just like you kids are sometimes, and he got run over. He thought he was so fast and so smart, just like you kids sometimes do, and run in front of a car, and the car won. He got killed. But the happy part of it is that these neighbor kids were so concerned and cared so much about it, they picked him up and brought him over to Ernie's yard and over in Ernie's garden to a burial place that we have for animals, and buried him. Gave him a decent burial. Put some papers on top so the dirt wouldn't be right on him. I see that tombstone there. There's a lot more animals buried there than Chucky and Wanda Woodchuck. And they also got run over out in the road, just like this squirrel did, and some of the other animals. But there's cats there, and there's dogs there, and there's birds buried in there, and Ernie hasn't got around to write all the names down. You'd have to use both sides there to get them all down. Now there's other woodchucks yet, of course, but these were some that got killed out in the road. And Ernie and the kids buried them. Nice kids, aren't they?
God is my help in every need. God does my every hunger feed. God walks beside me, guides my way through every moment of the day. I now am wise, I now am true, patient, kind, and loving too. All things I am, come do, and be, through Christ the truth that is in me. God is my health, I can't be sick. God is my strength unsailing quick. God is my all, I know no fear, since God and love and truth are here. Amen.
Concord Hymn, sung at the completion of the Battle Monument, April 19, 1836. By the rude bridge that arched the flood, their flag to April's breeze unfurled, here once the embattled farmers stood and fired the shot heard round the world. The foe, long since in silence slept, alike the conqueror silent sleeps, and time the ruined
This week's meditation is the poetry of Ralph Waldo Emerson, read by Archibald MacLeish, recorded in 1971.
We set today a votive stone, that memory may their deed redeem when, like our sires, our sons are gone. Spirit that made those heroes dare to die and leave their children free, bid time and nature gently spare the shaft we raise to them and thee. Merlin, thy trivial harp will never please or fill my craving ear. Its chords should ring as blows the breeze, free, peremptory, clear. No jingling serenader's art nor tinkle of piano strings can make the wild blood start in its mystic springs. The kingly bard must smite the chords rudely and hard, as with hammer or with mace, that they may render back artful thunder, which conveys secrets of the solar track, sparks of the supersolar blaze. Merlin's blows are strokes of fate, chiming with the forest tone when boughs buffet boughs in the wood, chiming with the gasp and moan of the ice-imprisoned flood, with the pulse of manly hearts, with the voice of orators, with the din of city arts, with the cannonade of wars, with the marches of the brave and prayers of might from martyr's cave. Great is the art, great be the manners of the bard. He shall not his brain encumber with the coil of rhythm and number, but leaving rule and pale forethought, he shall aye climb for his rhyme. pass in, the angels say, into the upper doors, nor count compartments of the floors, but mount to paradise by the stairway of surprise. Blameless master of the games, king of sport that never shames, he shall daily joy dispense, hid in song's sweet influence. Forms more cheerly live and go, what time the subtle mind sings aloud the tune whereto their pulses beat, and march their feet, and their members are combined. By Sybarites beguiled, he shall no task decline, Merlin's mighty line extremes of nature reconciled, bereaved a tyrant of his will, and made the lion mild. Songs can the tempest still, scattered on the stormy air, mold the year to fair increase, and bring in poetic peace. He shall not seek to weave in weak, unhappy times efficacious rhymes. Wait his returning strength, bird that from the nadir's floor to the zenith's top can soar. The soaring orbit of the muse exceeds that journey's length, nor profane affect to hit, or compass that by meddling wit, which only the propitious mind publishes when 'tis inclined. There are open hours when the god's will sallies free, and the dull idiot might see the flowing fortunes of 1,000 years, sudden, at unawares, self-moved, fly to the doors, nor sword of angels could reveal what they conceal. The rhyme of the poet modulates the king's affairs, balance-loving nature made all things in pairs, to every foot its antipode, each color with its counter glowed. To every tone beat answering tones, higher or graver. Flavor gladly blends with flavor. Leaf answers leaf upon the bough, and match the paired cotyledons. Hands to hands and feet to feet, in one body grooms and brides, eldest right, two married sides in every mortal meet. Light's far furnace shines, smelting balls and bars, forging double stars, glittering twins and trines. The animals are sick with love, love sick with rhyme, each with all propitious time into chorus wove. Like the dancer's ordered band, thoughts come also, hand in hand, in equal couples mated, or else alternated, adding by their mutual gauge one to other health and age. Solitary fancies go, short-lived, wandering to and fro, most like to bachelors or an ungiven maid, not ancestors, with no posterity to make the lie afraid, or keep truth undecayed. Perfect paired as eagle's wings, justice is the rhyme of things. Trade and counting use the self-same tuneful muse, and nemesis, who with even matches odd, who athwart space redresses the partial wrong, fills the just period and finishes the song. Subtle rhymes with ruin rife murmur in the house of life, sung by the sisters as they spin. In perfect time and measure they build and unbuild our echoing clay, as the two twilights of the day fold us, music drunken, in. Threnody. The south wind brings life, sunshine, and desire, and on every mountain shadow breathes aromatic fire. But over the dead he has no power. The lost, he cannot restore. And looking over the hills I mourn the darling who shall not return. I see my empty house, I see my trees repair their boughs, and he, the wondrous child whose silver warble wild outvalued every pulsing sound within the air's cerulean round, the hyacinthine boy for whom morn well might break and April bloom, the gracious boy who did adorn the world whereinto he was born, and by his countenance repay the favor of the loving day, has disappeared from the day's eye. Far and wide she cannot find him. My hopes pursue, they cannot bind him. Returned this day the south wind searches, and finds young pines and budding birches, but finds not the budding man. Nature who lost cannot remake him. Fate let him fall, fate can't retake him. Nature, fate, men him seek in vain. And whither now, my truant wise and sweet, oh, whither tend thy feet? I had the right a few days ago thy steps to watch, thy place to know. How have I forfeited the right? Hast thou forgot me in a new delight? I hearken for thy household cheer, O eloquent child, whose voice an equal messenger conveyed thy meaning mild. What though the pains and joys whereof it spoke were toys, fitting his age and ken, yet fairest dames and bearded men who heard the sweet request, so gentle, wise, and grave, bended with joy to his behest, and let the world's affairs go by. A while to share his cordial game, or mend his wicker wagon frame, still plotting how their hungry ear that winsome voice again might hear. For his lips could well pronounce words that were persuasions. Gentlest guardians marked serene his early hope, his liberal mien, took counsel from his guiding eyes to make this wisdom earthly wise. Ah, vainly do these eyes recall the school march, each day's festival, when every morn my bosom glowed to watch the convoy on the road. The babe in willow wagon closed, with rolling eyes and face composed, with children forward and behind, like cupids studiously inclined. And he, the chieftain, paced beside, the center of the troop allied, with sunny face of sweet repose to guard the babe from fancied foes. The little captain, innocent, took the eye with him as he went. Each village senior paused to scan and speak the lovely caravan. From the window I look out to mark thy beautiful parade, stately marching in cap and coat, to some tune by fairies played, a music heard by thee alone, to works as noble led thee on. Now love and pride, alas, in vain up and down their glances strain. The painted sled stands where it stood, the kennel by the corded wood, his gathered sticks to staunch the wall of the snow tower when snow should fall. The ominous hole he dug in the sand, and childhood's castles built or planned. His daily haunts I will discern, the poultry yard, the shed, the barn, and every inch of garden ground paced by the blessed feet around, and from the roadside to the brook where into he loved to look. Stepped the meek fowls where erst they ranged, the wintry garden lies unchanged, the brook into the stream runs on, but the deep-eyed boy is gone. On that shaded day, dark with more clouds than tempests are, when thou didst yield thy innocent breath in bird-like heavings unto death, night came, and nature had not thee. I said, we are mates in misery. The morrow dawned with needless glow, each snowbird chirped, each fowl must crow, each tramper started, but the feet of the most beautiful and sweet of human youth had left the hill and garden. They were bound and still. There's not a sparrow or a wren, there's not a blade of autumn grain, which the four seasons do not tend, and tides of life and increase lend. And every chick of every bird and weed and rock moss is preferred. O ostrich-like forgetfulness, O loss of larger in the less! Was there no star that could be sent, no watcher in the firmament, no angel from the countless host that loiters round the crystal coast could stoop to heal that only child, nature's sweet marvel undefiled, and keep the blossom of the earth, which all her harvests were not worth? Not mine, I never called thee mine, but nature's heir. If I repine and seeing rashly torn and moved, not what I made, but what I loved, grow early old with grief that thou must to the wastes of nature go, 'tis because a general hope was quenched, and all must doubt and grope. For flattering planets seem to say, this child should ills of ages stay, by wondrous tongue and guided pen bring the flown muses back to men. Perchance not he, but nature ailed the world, and not the infant failed. It was not ripe yet to sustain a genius of so fine a strain, who gazed upon the sun and moon as if he came unto his own, and pregnant with his grander thought, brought the old order into doubt. His beauty once their beauty tried, they could not feed him, and he died, and wandered backward as in scorn, to wait an eon to be born. Ill day which made this beauty waste, plight broken, this high face defaced. Some went and came about the dead, and some in books of solace read. Some to their friends the tidings say, some went to write, some went to pray. One tarried here, there hurried one, but their heart abode with none. Covetous death bereaved us all, to aggrandize one funeral. The eager fate which carried thee took the largest part of me, for this losing is true dying. This is lordly man's down lying. This is slow but sure reclining, star by star his world resigning. O child of paradise, boy who made dear his father's home, in whose deep eyes men read the welfare of the times to come, I am too much bereft. The world dishonored thou hast left. O truths and nature's costly lie, O trusted broken prophecy, O richest fortune sourly crossed, born for the future, to the future lost. The deep heart answered, weepest thou? Worthier cause for passion wild, if I had not taken the child. And deemest thou, as those who pore with aged eyes short way before, think'st beauty vanished from the coast of matter, and thy darling lost? Taught he not thee, the man of eld, whose eyes within his eyes beheld heaven's numerous hierarchy span the mystic gulf from God to man? To be alone wilt thou begin when worlds of lovers hem thee in? Tomorrow, when the masks shall fall that dizen nature's carnival, the pure shall see by their own will which overflowing love shall fill. 'Tis not within the force of fate the fate conjoined to separate. But thou, my votary, weepest thou? I gave thee sight, where is it now?
Hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we also have forgiven our debtors. And leave us not in temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power and the glory forever. Amen.